Caden crouched low against a crumbling brick wall in the heart of the city's oldest district. The half-light of dawn lent the graffiti-covered alleys a dreamlike aura. He held a can of spray paint so tightly that his knuckles went white, but the cold metal gave him a sense of purpose. Under his black hoodie, Caden could feel his heart drumming with an intensity that matched the hiss of the paint can. There was almost no one on the street, just a distant figure scurrying home after a late shift. The city was hushed, neither quite asleep nor awake. Caden preferred these in-between hours for his work, when the boundary between the real world and his imagination seemed faint as a whisper. Tonight, the rough outline of his newest piece covered nearly half the wall. Bright yellows, electric blues, and tangles of blacks spell-like shapes intersected in chaotic lines. He stepped back, eyeing the design. While conscious decisions guided his colors and shading, the swirling shapes themselves seemed to transcribe from a part of his mind he didn't fully understand. Every time Caden closed his eyes, he saw these bizarre, alien patterns dancing behind his eyelids. Something about them drew him in, urging him to follow the lines, to keep painting. But the completion of each piece always brought an odd dizziness, and Caden would wander off, uncertain why his arms felt so exhausted. Today that dizziness returned as he gave the final stroke, an elongated series of curling marks, brimming with a faint luminescence he couldn't fully explain. He rubbed his eyes, and for a moment the shapes a few feet away seemed to writhe. The shadows elongated like silent serpents coiling around the letters he had just sprayed. He blinked, thinking it must be the dawnlight playing tricks. When his vision cleared, the lines settled back into place, flat and unmoving. The side of the building was quiet, only chipped concrete and weathered mortar. Caden exhaled. Another weird, fleeting hallucination. He'd had them before. Probably too many energy drinks, plus the rush of adrenaline that fueled his nocturnal artistry. He packed the paint cans into his backpack and tossed a final glance over his shoulder. Something about that last swirl drew his attention. A flicker, like heat distortion hovering just above the concrete. He leaned in, unsure whether to trust his eyes, yet there it was, a faint shimmer. Before he could second-guess himself, Caden yanked his camera phone out of his pocket. He snapped a quick photograph. The phone screen showed only his graffiti, bold against the wall, no hint of shimmering light. Must be my imagination, he thought. With a soft chuckle, he zipped up his backpack and hurried home. It wasn't until 2 days later that Caden learned something was terribly wrong. Reports started appearing on social media from people claiming they saw strange lights near an old warehouse several blocks away. One camera phone video showed what looked like a swirl of dark energy flickering in an alley, which had quickly vanished before curious onlookers could approach. The location was suspiciously close to his new piece. It made Caden restless. He tried to focus on everyday life, his job in a cafe, his banter with co-workers, but that curiosity gnawed at him like a slowly opening door. Eventually, he closed the cafe early one evening and set off for the warehouse. Not much was left of the smashed windows and metal doors, but he recognized the aura of the place instantly. Rotting timber and the pungent stench of damp, layered with that intangible hum of possibility. If magic existed in the world, this elbow of the city was where it would hide. His old piece from 2 weeks back was still there, a series of wavering geometric shapes sprawled over a door. As he approached, Caden noticed something new. A slash burnt into the metal, a flicker of cinder glowed in the dark recess. Cautiously, he reached out to touch the door. It was still slightly warm. He took a step back, gaze darting around the deserted space. Something was happening here. Maybe one of those online rumors had more truth than he wanted to believe. Caden glanced up at the nearest street lamp, which flickered overhead, as if threatened by the presence of some power feeding on its current. A tingle scanned up Caden's arms. He pulled out his phone, wanting to record evidence of the bizarre happenings. But the moment he hit record, the phone screen glitched, bright static lines cutting across it. He cursed under his breath. Another flash lit up the corner of his eye. Did he imagine it, or see a swirl of inky black slip behind a stack of crates? Determined, he pushed deeper into the warehouse, following the echoes of movement that seemed to recede from him like a timid animal. Light from the city street seeped in through a shattered window, casting complicated shadows over the chipped floor. His sneakers brushed across something sticky. Glancing down, he saw a dark, tar-like substance. It smelled acrid, and an uncomfortable wave of nausea swept through him, as if he had stumbled into a space he had no business being. He inched carefully around the tarp, stepping over wooden planks and broken shards of metal shelving. The hush felt alive. Suddenly, a voice sounded behind him. "You shouldn't be here." Spooked, Caden spun around. A man in a long coat stepped into the light. Strands of dyed silver hair stuck out from beneath his hat. He was tall, impossibly straight-backed, with eyes that seemed to dissect Caden at a glance. "Who are you?" Caden asked, voice trembling more than he wanted. The stranger ignored the question. Instead, he pointed at a nearby wall. "This shape," he said, with a noticeable accent Caden couldn't place. "When did you paint it?" Caden followed his pointing finger and realized that, yes, it was definitely one of his runic shapes, smudged, half-formed. I don't remember. Might have done it last week." He paused, searching his memory. Sometimes he sketched on random scraps of concrete just to get the swirl out of his head. "Why are you asking?" The stranger's mouth tightened, as if struggling to decide how much to reveal. "These symbols," he said, gesturing at the runes etched into the wall, "they are not mere artistic inventions. They possess power beyond your understanding. You see that tear in the metal?" He pointed at the warped door with the burned slash. "That's a rift, and I believe you helped open it." Caden felt as though his stomach had fallen out of his body. "That's impossible," he whispered, but the man's unwavering gaze told him otherwise. Faint recollections sharpened in Caden's mind. Glimmers in the air while he painted, a sense of his thoughts pulling from something ancient, beyond rational explanation. "What are you saying? That these shapes I spray are, what, magical illusions?" "Not illusions," the stranger replied. "They are runes, ancient ones, older than civilized memory. And your gift, this compulsive need to spray them everywhere, awakens dormant energies. You are summoning something, though not intentionally, and some of it has already begun slipping through." A part of Caden wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. He was just a street artist, not some arcane conjurer. Yet the scorch marks, the odd phone glitches, the swirling shapes that came unbidden into his mind, all of it weighed on him like a lead cloak. He started to ask more, but the stranger held up a hand. "Too many eyes here," he said. "We need to speak elsewhere." They left the warehouse and followed back alleys until they reached an abandoned storefront. The stranger nudged a loose board aside, revealing a hidden door to a cramped interior that smelled of musty books and dust. With one flick of a switch, a single bulb illuminated a small table and cluttered shelves stacked high with ancient tomes. Caden looked around in awe. "My name is Leandros," the man said at last, taking off his coat. Underneath, he wore black jeans and a threadbare sweater. A small copper pendant gleamed at his throat, an intricate geometric shape that seemed half familiar to Caden. "I've been in this city a while, tracking anomalies like those we just saw at the warehouse. I suspected someone was painting runes, but I didn't realize how widespread it was until I started noticing your signature style." Caden leaned against the table, mind buzzing with questions. "But why me? I don't understand any of this," Leandros sighed, crossing his arms. "In certain families, the gift flows through bloodlines. Maybe your ancestors tinkered in the arcane. Or perhaps a spirit whispered the runes into your subconscious. Either way, you're among a small group of individuals who can activate dormant runes, which linger like primal instructions to open doorways. Doorways to what? Leandros's jaw clenched. Not friendly places, I assure you. Dimensional chaos. Entities that see our world as a resource or a playground. A heavy silence clung to them. Caden replayed nights in his memory. The graffiti sessions, the fleeting illusions, and the unexplainable sense of something stirring inside his chest whenever he unleashed the paint on concrete. So, these rooms? How do I stop? Leandros leaned in. We must do more than stop. The door is already cracked open. We'll need to close it, or else bigger horrors will break through. First, we find each location you painted runes on. Then we apply a counter-sigil. It's a kind of seal. It's not easy, but once done, it'll reseal the portals. Okay, Caden said, trying to keep panic from crowding his voice. I have a memory of most places I've tagged, but some were random. I can't be sure I remember them all. That's a start, Leandros said. We'll do our best, but listen, time isn't on our side. Already the city is seeing more anomalies, right? The swirling shapes and flickers of darkness. They'll only grow bolder. Hearing it set Caden's nerves on edge. Still, threads of responsibility and guilt spiraled together inside him. He recalled the shimmering illusions around his last piece, the hush that felt alive behind the warehouse door, as if something were trying to break through. He only nodded in grim acknowledgement. That same night they began their work. Caden led Leandros to a small underpass near the river, where he had once painted a labyrinth of swirling loops. The paint had begun to peel, but Caden's memory flickered with the clarity of that swirl. They crouched in the dark, using Leandros's flashlight and a trembling piece of chalk to trace a messy seal over the existing runes. Caden felt an odd sensation in his fingertips, like a buzzing magnetism, urging him either to continue or to run away. The moment they finished, an electric spark crackled through the air as though they'd short-circuited an invisible wire. The underpass lights flickered. A low humming sound came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Then silence. That's one, Leandros said quietly. He looked exhausted. We have many more to go. They spent the next day pinned to Caden's ragged old city map. He marked a red dot on every place he could recall painting the runes. Runderpasses, abandoned theatres, shuttered factories, the rotting boardwalk at the city's edge. The more he remembered, the more the map spotted with colour, like a chessboard full of ominous pieces. By the time dusk arrived, they had a plan. Visit each site one by one to perform the sealing. They set out in Caden's battered hatchback as night draped the city like a cloak. Under every site's dim glow of street lamps or flickering neon signs, Leandros led the ritual. Sometimes Caden assisted with the chalk. Other times he just stood guard, feeling that creeping weirdness brush against his mind. Once, near an abandoned library, a creeping black vine-like shadow darted across the front steps, vanishing behind a row of dumpsters. Caden's heart pounded so fiercely that he nearly dropped the flashlight. Leandros glanced at him in alarm, but neither said anything. They pressed on. After sealing half a dozen runes, they paused at a 24-hour diner for coffee and a quick bite. Caden slurped from his cup, but his mouth felt too numb to taste anything. He kept recalling glimpses of an inky swirl, like emptiness, coiling in the corner of his vision. What if something's following us? He finally murmured. Leandros's eyes were half-lidded, but still sharp. He fiddled with the copper pendant at his neck. They are following us, he said. The forces on the other side aren't mindless. They sense the seals going up, and they want to keep the doorway open. The best we can do is keep moving and finish our work. During the next few stops, that ominous presence grew more tangible. Wind hissed through alleyways, scattering debris. Street lights buzzed loudly before winking out, leaving them in near blackness as they scrawled the counter-sigils. More than once, Caden sensed a pair of eyes on him. Glancing over his shoulder, he'd see nothing, but the sensation never faded. At an old skate park, Caden froze. There, on the top of the half-pipe, was a new piece of graffiti. It was done in the same style as his runes, yet he knew he hadn't painted it. Something else had. The lines were sharper, angled as if carved by claws. They pulsed faintly in the moonlight, forming a swirling portal of blackish purple. He approached carefully, trembling. Above the runic shape, a half-translucent tear in reality shimmered, emitting a stench of rot and ozone. Shadows writhed on the edge, and Caden swore he glimpsed an elongated limb stretching out before retreating. Leandros came up behind him, inhaling sharply. Without a word, he knelt down and began scrawling the seal. Caden joined, chalking each line from memory, determined to mirror Leandros's precision. A gust of wind scraped dust across the concrete. Then, out of the swirling mass, a form burst through. Something humanoid but twisted, with eyes that glowed amber and a torso in constant flux between this world and the next. It lunged at Caden with jerking, unnatural movements. He flinched, dropping the chalk. Leandros shouted a command in a guttural, ancient language, raising his pendant high. Light flared from the copper shape, forming a shimmering barrier that collided with the creature. The being shrieked, then retreated back into the swirling tear. Heart hammering, Caden quickly recovered the chalk and finished the final line of the seal. The swirl snapped shut with a resounding pop. A wave of energy collided with them, sending Caden stumbling back until he fell on his rear. When he looked up, the tear was gone. Only the half-pipe remained, marked with smudges of fresh chalk. Caden's breaths came ragged, and tears of shock pricked his eyes. That had been real. He could still feel the creature's shriek reverberating in his bones. Leandros helped him to his feet. "They're pushing harder," he said. "We need to hurry. There can't be many locations left." They spent the rest of the night and the following day sealing every last patch of Caden's graffiti. Some of it had been partially painted over by rival artists, so the runes were incomplete. That made them less potent, easier to seal. Others, like the one they'd just encountered, were fully active, warping the air around them. At each site, Caden felt more confident in tracing the seals, even though the dread pressed relentlessly at the back of his thoughts. He kept reminding himself that these runes had been unleashed by his own hand, an unintentional but dangerous gift. Confronting them head-on was the only way to fix it. By the time they arrived at Caden's newest piece in the old district, where he'd first sensed the shimmering air, the sun was just starting to rise on the third day. The tall, graffiti-covered wall loomed in front of them like a giant tapestry of Caden's subconscious. He remembered how dizzy he'd felt after finishing it. He remembered glimpsing that odd flicker in the corner of his eye. Now he sized up the project in its entirety, spotting patterns he hadn't consciously placed there, lines that resembled the shapes Leandros had been sealing for the last 2 nights. Bits of trash blew by their feet as they set their supplies down. "Let's make this one quick," Caden said, glancing nervously at the still dim sky. "I don't want to be ambushed again." Leandros nodded, immediately setting to work on the bottom portion of the piece. Caden hopped onto a nearby crate to begin marking the higher sections. This time, however, an oppressive weight seemed to press down on them. The lines of chalk quivered in Caden's hand, and his breath felt short, as if the air was thickening. A faint hum began to fill his ears, at first subtle like tinnitus. Then it grew louder, insistent. He glanced down, intending to ask Leandros something, but his partner was hunched forward, expression twisted in concentration. The chalk in Leandros's hand glowed softly, reflecting off the copper pendant that flickered with inner fire. Caden realized with a jolt that the runes here were more powerful, more complete than the others. They needed to move faster. He refocused on finishing the lines, ignoring the rising buzz in his head. Then, the moment he drew the last symbol, a surge of energy ignited the air. The entire graffiti wall shimmered, as though lit from behind by lightning. Caden barely had time to throw up his arms before waves of force rippled outward. He tumbled backward off the crate, feet tangling in the empty paint cans. A rift tore open on the wall, a vertical scar of swirling purple and black. For an instant, Caden glimpsed a chaotic dimension beyond, a place where city towers stood at impossible angles and shadows devoured flickers of shaky light. The sketchy illusions he'd seen in his mind's eye came to horrifying life. Echoing roars spilled from the portal. Something huge and serpentine began to emerge. A clawed limb tested the border, scraping the pavement with a shrill screech. Leandros brandished his pendant again, muttering a complex incantation. Pulses of light radiated from him, striking the emerging entity and forcing it to recoil. But it kept coming, relentless. Each blow from Leandros's pendant caused it to pause, only to push further. Caden fumbled for the chalk, hands shaking so badly he could hardly draw a straight line. He scrawled over the runes at the edge of the portal, trying to complete the ceiling, but the luminous shapes twisted away from him as though they were alive. A gnarled claw reached out, slicing the air near Caden's face. He yelped, stumbling back. Sweat dripped into his eyes, betraying his frantic state. Leandros cried out, "Caden, the seal must be precise. Remember what I taught you." Summoning every ounce of willpower, Caden steadied himself. The runes he'd painted whispered to him, echoing in his mind. He pictured the swirling shapes, but inverted and locked in place. He drew a single spiral, then crossed it with angled lines. The chalk glowed. He pressed his palm to the wall, letting that buzzing magnetism flow through his arms. This time, he didn't shy away from it. He focused, harnessing it like a reservoir of hidden power. The swirling darkness around the portal hissed in defiance. Leandros shouted another incantation. Voice echoing, light and darkness crashed, sending cracks skittering across the concrete. Caden screamed, channeling every ounce of creativity and determination into the final stroke of the seal. In one brilliant flash, the portal and the monstrous limb dissolved into flickering static, then vanished. The runes on the wall collapsed into inert paint. Silence slammed down around them. For a moment, Caden thought he'd gone deaf. His ears rang from the sudden absence of the buzzing. He rested a shaky hand against the wall, panting. Beside him, Leandros doubled over, gripping his knees as he gasped for air. They locked eyes, realizing that the immediate danger had passed, that they'd succeeded in closing the final, most powerful portal. Neither spoke for a minute. The dawn light grew stronger, turning the sky a pale orange. At last, Leandro stood upright. "You did it," he murmured. "You sealed the largest rift. Your skill with the chalk matched the intensity of what was awakened here." Caden let out a half laugh, half sob. "Then it's finally over?" Leandros nodded, though a hint of caution lingered in his eyes. "For now, yes. These runes can resurface, especially in a city that's saturated with arcane traces, but we sealed your direct lines to whatever dimension was pushing through." Picking up the empty cans, Caden wondered if he'd ever paint graffiti again. The raw creative freedom once filled him with exhilaration, but now he understood that his art wasn't just a personal outlet. It was fueled by something ancient, something that could tear holes in reality if he wasn't careful. He scanned the weathered city street, banners of old paint, rusted fences, and battered brick walls. This city was his canvas, yet he had almost let it become a portal to chaos. In the golden morning light, Caden offered Leandros a tired smile. "Thank you," he said. "I wouldn't have known what to do without you." Leandros rested his hand on Caden's shoulder. "There's a time to create and a time to seal. You discovered both sides of that coin. Use this knowledge carefully. If you choose to keep painting, practice discipline. Runes can be harnessed for good, but they carry great responsibility." Caden nodded. "I won't forget. Maybe I'll still paint, but not in the same way, not blindly. I need to learn more about what I'm doing." Leandros handed him a worn, leather-bound book that bristled with odd bookmarks. "This might help. It's old, but it explains how runic energies mesh with the physical world. Study it. If you ever need me, this city is my home. I'll be around." The two parted ways, and Caden headed home under an awakening sky. His mind still bristled with images of the serpentine limb, the swirl of interdimensional chaos. Yet alongside the fear, a sense of awe resonated. A door in his worldview had cracked open, revealing a tapestry of possibility he never knew existed. He was an artist, a medium for forces older than time. Now it was up to him whether to leave that power dormant or to master it. Hours later, he stood in front of a fresh, clean wall near his apartment, blank surface, beckoning, a slim piece of chalk rolled between his fingers. The city hummed around him, indifferent or perhaps oblivious to the night of magical battles. Caden inhaled the crisp air, scanning the grey concrete. Was he ready to try again? To paint with knowledge rather than reckless abandon? Leandros's parting words rang through his head. He raised the chalk, breathing slowly. Instead of swirling shapes that bled chaos, he started with a controlled line, letting creativity and caution blend. It was only a single brushstroke, but it felt deliberate. The world didn't shatter open. No portals cracked the dawn. Perhaps, in time, he would craft images that could soothe the city's hurts, rather than tear holes in its foundation. He stepped back, examining that first careful stroke. A hint of luminescence danced along the edges, but it quickly settled, safe and contained. Caden allowed himself a small smile. He might not be able to undo the fearsome events he unleashed, but he understood now. He couldn't deny the magic in his blood, in his paint. He felt it pulsing in the chalk dust on his fingertips. Whatever came next, from this day forward, he would face it with eyes wide open. That was all an artist could do. See the hidden shapes in the shadows and choose carefully how to bring them into the light. And in that choice lay his power to protect the city he called home, one painted line at a time.